computer. I don't know if I pressed cloud. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to be talking about just the migration journey and how our students kind of come to us, the various channels. And so just to start it off, we are recording the webinar, but there are some discussions. If you want to, I'll put you in breakout rooms, so feel free to speak and show your faces in there because I have it set up to only record the main session. So, and then, yeah, so I will just get this PowerPoint queued up. And then just for the sake of time, I would ask that any questions we have set slides that have any questions written on it. So, and or just use the chat feature. So, because when I ran through this on Friday, we did go a bit over time. So I want to respect your time, of course. So we are just going to open with a bit of a discussion. Let's see if I can. Oh, I forgot I can't see your faces. All right. So slideshow. All right. So as you know, this is Catholic Charities Harrisburg. I am Amy, and I have my backup computer. There we go. So migration journey. So warm up, I'm going to put you guys in a bit of a small group. And while I get the breakout room set up, I just want you to think about, I want you to share your name and then what class you're volunteering in. And then I want you to describe your home in 3 words. Okay. It can be like it's a house, or it could be 3 adjectives. So however you want to take it. All right. So that was actually a really short share screen. So let me get this organized, breakout rooms, good practice. So I hope everyone's excited for the new session. Maybe 2, 3 breakout rooms and sign manually, create. And we're going to keep it short, maybe 5 minutes total. And I might pop in and out just to see you guys. And open all rooms. All right, cool. You guys should, did this work? Hold on. I thought I did random. Maybe it wanted you to choose, recreate. Hold on. There we go. Let's try that. I know what I'm doing. All right, and then it's just my cat sitting in the main session. So I want to go spy on my people. Join the smallest room. Hi. Hi. Oh, is this not working? Hold on. Sorry. I guess when I'm in here, it goes to me. Never mind. Have fun talking. I'm sorry. All right, there we go. Oh, I can hear that. All right. There we go. All right. Yeah, so Susan and Teresa, you guys had the smallest breakout room. So, but yeah. Anyways, let's see. And then Susan, I know you have a background in some law and stuff that pertains. So if at any point you need to correct me or anything, please feel free. So, but yeah, or clarify for sure. So why can't I? So I'm trying to set it up on this backup laptop so I can see all the faces when I'm, there we go. I think that should work. Okay, so people should be coming back. So maybe I'll close all of them because 5 minutes actually seems like a lot. Now, all right, close all rooms and now. And I'll get the slide share back up. All right. Wonderful. All right. So welcome back, everybody. I cut it a little bit short just because sake of time and numbers and clocks. All right. So I hope you guys all had time to get to know one another if you don't already. And moving on to, we're just going to have a bit of a disclaimer. Sorry, while I try to work my backup laptop so I can see your faces. Wonderful. All right. So are we sharing? Has the slide advanced for all of you or no?
Yeah, we can see. Yes.
Okay, good. So I just want to go over a bit of a disclaimer, what this presentation is meant to be and what it's not meant to be. So I'm just hoping that this is informational and to kind of increase your understanding of what a lot of our students have gone through. And then also maybe spark reflection and or discussion, depending on how much time we have. And what it's not meant to be is a moral or political lecture, because we will get into some politically charged topics. Hopefully not too much. And this is also not a representation of the stance of Catholic Charities as an organization. This is just, yeah. So, and also just as a disclaimer, I'm sure you know, or can think that we will be talking about some sad and heavy topics. And so if I am going quickly and if I just keep plugging away, it's not meant to be brash or unfeeling or insensitive to these topics. It's for the sake of time, but also just, yeah. Anyways, so moving on, we're just going to talk about some players in the game, right? So this is basically just a lot of acronyms that I may or may not be using. I don't want you to feel like, oh gosh, what does that mean? And if you do, of course, feel free to chime in either via the chat or it's a question I can answer quickly out loud. So, and then I have a picture of the World Cup because that happened recently, and I'm sure a lot of your students really liked that. So, side by side speaker. All right. So first up, I think the big one is the United Nations. The UN here is a map of current participants, I believe. So this is from the website, so I trust that it's relatively up to date. So a subsidiary branch of the UN is the UNHCR that deals so this is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and they work all over the world, of course, both in countries where refugees come from, but then also mainly in countries where refugees land. So there's also a USA branch of the UNHCR. And so the government branches that they work with are the Federal Department of State, and then also the Citizenship and Immigration Services, so USCIS. If any of you are our citizenship tutors, you're probably familiar with this department. And then we also have, so I believe the USCIS is part of the Department of Homeland Security, but you can fact check me if you want. So, and then we also have our Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, which is different. And that's where our refugees are also filtered through, or the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services has a lot to do with our refugees here. And then we actually have a state refugee coordinator and a state refugee health coordinator. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that until today, or sorry, when I was prepping for this, which feels like one long day. But what is happening? All right. I guess my breakout room just ended. Oh, I clicked on a link. That's what's happening. All right. So let me go back there. Sorry, I think I clicked the hyperlink. All right. Make big. There we go. Thank you for bearing with me. Zoom makes everything a little bit more in-depth. All right. So there are non-governmental national partners that the UNHCR and the federal and state departments also work with when trying to place refugees and get them kind of set up to hopefully thrive here. So we have the Refugee Council USA. We also have a site called Interaction or an organization. A really good resource and organization is CORE, so the Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange. They have a lot of webinars and training that myself and some of our other staff have been through and or just watched the recordings of. And then they also have an app and website available called Settle In. And as you can see by this logo, it is available in almost any of the big languages that refugees may come from. And it has a lot of kind of first arrival, how to do this, how to get your kids enrolled, what paying rent is, basic utilities, but then also resources for mental health where you are. So anything refugees coming in may need. So, and then an international non-governmental NGO is the International Organization for Migration, and they also have a lot of really good resources in multiple languages, both for service providers, but also refugees and immigrants themselves. So, and then there are actually 9, but they don't do much resettlement or any official resettlement themselves. So there are 9 resettlement agencies in the United States that are kind of qualified, certified to receive refugees, place them, get them settled in. So we have Church World Service, okay, this is a good test for me, the Ethiopian Community Development Council, maybe, or committee. So C could stand for anything. There's the Episcopal Migration Ministry, I believe. This is us, we're the Catholic bishops, so USCCB, Conference of Catholic Bishops. There's World Relief, Hebrew Immigration Aid and Service, so I should have written the acronyms down, but that is, I believe, the oldest one, the longest standing one. There's also Lutheran Immigration Services, the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, I believe, and then International Rescue Committee. So if you're around our office any amount of time, you might hear any of these acronyms thrown around, and these are just our partners in resettling. So, and then we'll go over now where we as ESL providers fall. So there we go. So in this kind of trickle down. So first, our students are in their country of origin, right? From, I believe we're up to 42 different countries represented, maybe more. Again, this can change with every intake we do. And then one way or another, our students come to us across a border or multiple, sometimes across oceans or many. And many of our students stay in intermediary countries, not all of them though. So this would typically be a refugee, excuse me. And then they arrive in our area, whether it be Harrisburg, Lancaster, York, and go through the resettlement process. So if they're a refugee, and then where we come in is the adjustment and getting into a new routine. And so kind of at the tail end of that process, but it also is kind of just the beginning of hopefully their D life. So star for you are here. So, all right. Any quick questions then while we we're going to next talk about just some theoretical frameworks that may be helpful. So, and if not, no problem. So, wonderful. Okay. So, clicking there. All right. So, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is, again, one of those 9 resettlement agencies. Now, how Charity, my predecessor, described it, the 9 resettlement agencies are, I wasn't sure if it was metaphorical or literal, some of you may know, but they kind of have a big meeting where the UNHCR and or representatives from the USA branch of the UNHCR go through people who have applied for refugee status in the US, and they're cross-referencing everything with, oh, this family has relatives here, this family has specialized workers who would work well here. And so they kind of go around, and that's how some of the refugees are divvied up. So that's probably not a great term to use. Anyway, so then Catholic Charities USA works with the Conference of Catholic Bishops to then further place refugees in other branches of Catholic Charities by region. And so, as you all know, we're the Diocese of Harrisburg, and then we're a little, us as the ESL branch are a little sub-branch of Catholic Charities USA, or of Catholic Charities Harrisburg, and we offer resettlement, employment, and then of course us, the ESL program. So that is a bit of how we fit in. All right. Oh, there it is. I knew I moved that. Okay. So first of all, we're just going to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You should be familiar with this, but if not, don't feel bad. It's just not something specific to ESL or resettlement at all. So basic idea is, you can't really learn grammar or English or a new trade if you don't have food, water, a house, etc. And then moving up in the pyramid, like different levels of needs. So after those base needs are met, then you can worry maybe about making new friends or trying to fit into a new culture or deciding whether or not you want to fit into this new culture. So, all right, click. Next, we have the U curve of cultural adjustment. And so, as you can see, we have the upon arrival, and again, this is not every single person goes through all of these stages the exact same way, and it can also be cyclical. So, excuse me. So often there's a honeymoon phase upon arrival. And so you have this in like relationships as well. So an example is a woman I was talking to, we were talking about, oh, so like, what do you like about your new home? And she said, it's really quiet. There are no, there's no gunfire, no bombs, right? And so that's a bit of a more serious example. And I'm sure you guys can think of a lot of examples from your students. And then next we have the culture shock phase. So feelings of worry or confusion as kind of the rose tinted glasses come off. This can look like a lot of things. It could be anything from like, I'm kind of sick of hamburgers. Every portion size is huge and I'm gaining weight. Or it could be something, I've had a lot of students tell me that their children are bullied in school constantly. So it could also be something more serious and insidious like that. And then hopefully, they're able then to move on to an adjustment phase, and then on to what this chart is calling the mastery phase, where you feel stable, you have enough routine and support to start taking other steps forward, like finding a new job or finding a job that's closer to your dream job. For those of us who are current volunteers with us, we spend a lot of time talking about employment. So, and a problem that a lot of our students face, unfortunately, is occupational downgrading, right? So I had a surgeon in my class and he can't find a job, unless it's maybe a warehouse. And so understandably, that might not be ideal. So anyways, so just, I think some time for reflection, and I'm just going to ask you to think about this throughout. So, have you heard any examples of the honeymoon phase or perspectives from that phase from your students? And then also expressions of culture shock. So, and then for time's sake, I think we'll just keep going on. But then just some little asides. So a helpful reminder that we're comparing what may sound like binary dichotomies, right? Like, oh, the honeymoon phase and the culture shock phase, everything is, great and it's beautiful here versus, oh, everything sucks and everybody hates me, right? But not everything is so black and white, as I'm sure you know, but just to state it for the record. And also just two things can be true at once, right? Like there are some things that our students can really like about living here, and there are other parts that they may not be wild about. So it's not, there aren't solid boundaries between these phases. So, all right. Wonderful. All right, any questions or anything as we move on? Look at my side computer. All right, wonderful. So, it was a bit late when I put this part together, but I say, oh, what are these? Strange pizzas? No. So these are actually acculturation models, right? So what this larger circle is supposed to represent is the host culture, and then the smaller circles, or the purple circles in this case, are supposed to represent newcomers to the culture. They could be, one family from a single culture, or the model also kind of works with, one family from the Ukraine, one family from Afghanistan, one family from Syria. So, all right, and then just as another disclaimer, these are just theoretical models to help you make sense of some complex topics and thoughts and ideas. They're not supposed to be ultimate truths or anything, so, or irrevocable categories of the soul. So, yeah. I don't know what I was thinking when I typed that, but I think it got my point across. All right, so this model is meant to represent segregation or exclusion of the two newcomers and host culture. So this could be a mindset from one or both parties, okay? So it's, and then generally this segregation idea is out of fashion here in the US, but overseas where other refugees may be landing, it may not be as old school. It may be very real and upfront and widely accepted, and even codified into different laws, right? And we'll talk about that. We'll touch on that a bit later as well, what that looks like. Okay, so segregation and exclusion can also look like this. The newcomers are more integrated, but they're also very insular. And again, this could be their choice. It could be the choice of the host culture, or it could be both. And so an example would be, well, I think we all have students in our classes who maybe don't or can't practice English outside of our class, whether that's their choice or they just, it's difficult, right? To speak English, your second or third or fourth language at home with your family when they're all speaking your home language, your mother language. So, all right, there we go. And so an example that one of our teachers gave on Friday, she was talking about her Japanese heritage, I believe. And, oh, well, yeah, for sure. Like, that wasn't a guess. And she was talking about how, oh, we have, anywhere you go, you'll have Chinatown or a little Korea, but you don't really have that with the Japanese folk, because she's Japanese Canadian. So, and she talked about how her parents spoke Japanese to each other, but she never learned Japanese growing up, not by necessarily anyone's choice. That's just how it happened. And so that kind of shows the different values of how the parents from the Japanese culture felt coming into a host culture versus they didn't necessarily club together with other Japanese families. So as a bit of an example. So anyways, this is marginalization. And so this is a more extreme version. And so this could be, again, one or both parties. And so this is kind of actively moving away from each other or putting up walls, whether they be physical, legal, or otherwise. And so social, I guess. So at least one party wants little or nothing to do with the other. Again, sometimes it is both. So, yeah. And then next, kind of on the going to the other side of the spectrum, we have assimilation. So this is a much more inclusive model of cultural adjustment, right? And so the idea is it is more inclusive, but at what cost? As you can see, the purple circles have lost most of what made them purple. They only have a little border and they're mostly green on the inside. So I'll let you extrapolate what that looks like in students and or people, maybe yourself if you've had a significant or any cross-cultural experience. So, and complete assimilation may not be possible to a degree, especially when, especially when certain regions are very typified by race specifically. So, let's see, and then the host culture itself may also have different views about assimilation or acculturation in general. So, all right, next we have integration. And so typically this is more adjusted and functional in the host culture. So the newcomers are typically more adjusted, and they may have even reached that mastery phase in the U-shaped model. All right. And then we also have cultural fluency, which is just kind of a different way of being kind of within those two, integration and assimilation, if you will. So this meant to represent more of an internal balance of home culture and the host culture, and being able to fully function in both of those cultures and kind of bounce back and forth between the two to some degree. So there we go. And then here's just all of that put together into rectangles instead of circles. So I'll let you look at that for a moment. All right, and then I believe I did send this PowerPoint to all or most of you, so you are able to click on these sources and read more about these topics if you are interested. So wonderful. All right, I'll stop again. Any questions as we move on to more things? All right, let's see here. All right, cool. Check the chat real quick. All right, wonderful. So next we're just going to define some terms, and these will help us hopefully get all on the same page and clear up any misconceptions and or just some terms can mean more than one thing, and I'll clarify what we're talking about when we use it, usually in our ESL resettlement definition. So the first term is migrant, and there's actually no official international definition for migrant, although it typically refers to someone who is outside their country of usual residence, usually their home country, for either short term or long term. So short term is defined as 3 to 12 months roughly, or longer, so 2 to 3 years, although the idea of permanency is not involved typically. So I guess you could say the only permanent thing is that they move from place to place. This is often associated with migrant workers, although they're not all completely the same. So it's kind of like how all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, right? So, all right, next we're going to talk about displaced persons. So these are people who are forced to flee their homes as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations, or other events that would seriously disrupt the public and everyday living. So this is from the UNHCR and World Relief. So today, over 100 million people have been forcibly displaced. So like as of 2023. Which is a world record in our current history. So before the conflict in Ukraine, it was hovering around like 90 million, but we are officially over 100 million now. And so displaced persons is important because it includes both internal and external displacement, because you can be well, I guess we haven't talked about the definition of a refugee, but you could have been forced to flee your home due to the same reasons someone who is classified as a refugee would have been forced to flee, but you could just be in the neighboring city, right? And so you wouldn't be classified as a refugee, then you would just be not just, but you would be a displaced person internally. So like what that would look like here would be if 3 Mile Island went nuclear again and we had to move to Pittsburgh. So, all right. So here's just a useful graph from the UNHCR. So you can see the percentages of there's most of the displaced people are internally displaced. That's our IDPs, right? So over 50% of the displaced persons are internal. And then we have refugees under different categories, and then also asylum seekers. And we will talk about the differences between them very shortly. So I just think it's helpful to see very colorful and up-to-date graphs. So the UNHCR is great for that. And actually, it's so great. We're going to go visit their site. And I think I'm sharing my internet, not just the PowerPoint. So hopefully you all can see this. So according to the UNHCR currently, there are actually 103 million forcibly displaced. So that's 3 million more than what was on the slide. And about half of them are internally displaced. And I just wanted to show you, all right, this number, 72% of the, let's say, of all the refugees are from only 5 countries. So that's a very high percentage from a very small amount of countries. I'll let you do the thinking and the math on this. So again, this is the UNHCR refugee statistics page if you want to take a look at that more on your own. So I highly recommend it. And it looks like they have an app. Wonderful. All right, now how do I get back? Hold on. Put your faces over my tabs. There we go. Okay, and then I want to make it big. Enter full screen. All right. Moving on. So here's just a top arrivals for the United States specifically by country, and this is before the crisis in Ukraine, I believe. So you can see the graph in the, I think it goes by 20,000. So again, if you're a visual person, helps kind of summarize things. All right. And then here is a population density map, which I also thought was interesting. And so Pennsylvania is, I believe, number 10 in taking refugee arrivals, so which is on a later slide. So, and okay, so moving on, this is unaccompanied minors, and so the UNHCR defines these as children who are under 18 but have no adult caretaker or parent with them when they're either processed or picked up to process. Usually, most of the unaccompanied minors that we have in the States come over the southern border, and a lot of them are, like it's a large percent, are from Central American countries. So yeah, so estimated over 40% of those displaced people in the world are unaccompanied minors. So of that 103 million that we saw, 40% of those. So some of these children are orphans, and others had been sent away by their parents to seek refuge. And so, yeah, this one stuff, there's a lot of other resources listed on that Google document I sent, but there's a lot of both ministries, but also organizations and systems within existing organizations, like the foster care system, that aim to kind of help stem the worst of this very sad problem. So, sorry, don't want to get too much into it, just because, I mean, we can, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to research more and find out more for you, or pull up some of the pages that we have. So anyways, zooming back out. So immigrant is, there should be a word in everyone's vocabulary. This is someone who makes a conscious decision to leave their home for a foreign country with the intention of settling there. Oh, I meant to fix that. Okay, with the intention of settling there, often for economic reasons, but not always. So this definition comes to us from the International Rescue Committee. So that was that one with the yellow arrow. doesn't matter. They just have a cool logo. That's how you know it's good marketing, I guess. Okay, so anyways, notably, immigrants are free to return to their home country or essentially to leave the host country whenever they want to. And then in contrast to specifically a refugee, which is a type of immigrant. So these are persons who are outside of their home country who have been fled or forced to flee for a number of reasons. So, excuse me, first being reasonable fear of or actually having experienced persecution and or conflict, generalized violence in either their place of living or aimed at their themselves, whether it be, or we'll get into different types of persecution in the next slide that count as refugee, that help. Anyways, moving on. Generalized violence. Okay, and then so the circumstances essentially have gotten so bad in their home country that they require international protection. A lot of times it's because their government can't or won't help and or protect them. And so there are 5 grounds of persecution that are legally recognized internationally through set by the United States, or sorry, the United Nations and the UNHCR. It's mostly the UNHCR. So the 5 grounds are race, religion, nationality, social group, and political opinion. And so I believe the social group category is the most flexible. And so a lot of times the process for being classified as a refugee, you have to be able to prove your reasonable fear of persecution one way or another to your, I don't know if they call them caseworkers, but to the UNHCR. So next we'll talk about asylum seekers. So asylum seekers are a type of refugee who apply for legal residency status at a port of entry or after they've entered the country either legally or illegally. And so asylum seekers have often been portrayed as illegal immigrants, but crossing a border to then claim or seek asylum is a legal action. It's something legal they can do. And so then their case would have to be heard by the governing body in whichever country so in US law, this US immigration law, this is a thing, but also in other countries, if this is codified. So, but then also according to international law, if you're a part of a participating country in the UNHCR. So then we also have undocumented immigrants. So this is typically the nicer term for an illegal. And so World Relief currently estimates about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US. Of course, it's difficult to pinpoint that number. And about half of those are also estimated to have come here legally on temporary visas, but then just overstayed. So, yeah. And so I just thought this was interesting. This is from the New American Economy. And so top industries for undocumented workers. I just thought it was interesting to see. And you all, since you're ESL volunteers and teachers, I'm sure you can read this. I'll leave this up for a moment. I set my tea noisily. Okay. All right, and then this isn't necessarily something I think we have time to get into, but it's just a question, which is, it's not an unfair question necessarily. You could probably ask it a lot nicer, but just think about this and how talking more about the immigration process and the journey, hopefully it can deepen our perspective on answering this question. So we learned a lot of facts, a lot of terms, names, things. I'm just going to pause again for questions really quick. And yeah, I think we're making good time. All right. How are we doing? Thumbs up, is anyone? Okay. Very good. Okay, let's see. Okay. Yes, Colleen, I do see you. So thumbs up from Mary. Wonderful. All right. So it's big for me. How do I make it big for you again?
Amy, I have a question.
Yes.
For asylum seekers, when they, if they elect to go through the process of seeking asylum, when they fill out those documents, when they're asked for like a reason for asylum, are those families like encouraged to go back to like the reasons for refugee status, like that list of 5 things? Is that where they would?
Yeah, typically it is the same. Yes, good question. So the same reason someone would seek asylum is also typically the same rulings that follow from the people who are seeking refuge.
Okay.
So yeah, good question. So very good. All right. So sharing screen again. Oh, look at that. I had the pause and hydrate. Anyway, so we're about halfway through. Let's see. There we go. All right.
I have a question. This is
Yes,
Donna,
go for it, Donna.
related to Katie's question about folks applying for asylum. Are there certain countries that folks are more easily given asylum? I know some from certain countries that have gotten it, or it's strictly based on what they're saying and what information they're sharing about their issue.
It really does depend. So asylum seekers, right, they're applying for asylum, for refuge at our ports of entry, or once they're in the country. So a lot of them come up through the Mexican border. And so we do tend to get a lot, I believe, from South and Central America, but not exclusively. So there's a documentary actually that I'll recommend to you, and we have it linked later. It's just a 30-minute report. And it follows kind of a migrant's journey up through South and Central America. And the people on that journey are like from different continents. So they've flown into, I believe, South American countries that are easier to kind of access, and or they don't require pre-approved visas to get into, and then they just travel up. So asylum seekers could come from anywhere, but yeah, so did that kind of answer? So it does depend.
Yes, I just thought there were certain ones that, like I've heard people say it's difficult from Haiti, that the folks from Haiti are in a different category.
Yes, they do have something different on their paperwork visas, and it's called DT, and I don't know what that stands for, versus the Ukrainians have UHP, which is Ukrainian humanitarian parole. And so, but yeah, DT is a type of asylum category. And it may be more difficult to prove certain plights from Haiti, just because of the government historically being, more unstable than that of the Ukraine. So maybe the documentation isn't always all there. So yeah, I don't have a solid answer for you on that, but good question. If anyone does, you're welcome to jump in. Go ahead.
And Amy, are you going to be talking about the lottery when, they come here?
Yeah, we'll cover that a little bit.
Okay.
For sure. So yeah, good question. Right. Great. I want to move actually my secondary computer so I can see you a bit more. I always have to like turn my head. So, all right. Anyway, so next then what we're going to do is just kind of talk about the steps from country of origin to resettlement. Excuse me, a bit more in depth. So for immigration, this is excluding someone who is applying for refuge. And actually, Mary, this is your question.
Okay.
So there are 4 main immigration paths to the US. And so first is family unity. And so there are two types of that, or 2 tiers of family unity priorities for the US immigration system. And then second, we have a work visa. And then there's the diversity lottery that Mary mentioned. And then we also have humanitarian causes. So this is the category that refugees, asylees, and humanitarian parolees would fall into. And then also just some miscellaneous categories, which actually may be subtypes of the other ones. I don't entirely remember off the top of my head. Anyways, As you can see, this graph from the Immigration Policy Institute, which is a great site that has a lot of interactive maps and graphs, which I really like. A very, very large percentage of the immigration visas issued in the US year to year are for the purposes of family reunification. So we have the two tiers listed in these first two categories, the immediate relative or the family preference. Then we have the employment-based, the diversity lottery, and then some special immigrant visas. So, and then here's another graph, one that's kind of like a donut. So, yeah, so I'll let you take a look at that. And again, Migration Policy Institute, if you're interested in seeing this more in depth. So when we did this presentation in the morning, the donut was nice because we had little snacks that were donut looking. So, all right.
What question,
Yes.
Amy? Immediate relative of US citizen.
Mhm.
What is considered an immediate relative?
That is a great question, Donna. And actually, we're just going to click all of these so you can see them right away. So what that's considered is a spouse or a dependent, so like a child of a citizen. But you have to be under 21 and unmarried. And then you could also be a parent of a citizen and be considered an immediate relative. So, but then you as the citizen would have to be over 21 years old. So, does that help? So spouse, child, or spouse or a dependent of a citizen, or a parent of a independent citizen, if that makes sense. So, and then the USCIS on their website states that you can expect 6 to 12 months of processing time for these visas. Best case scenario, right? No backlogs, no COVID, no other crises going on in the world. So, all right, and then here's just something fun and new that I learned actually when I worked at an Amazon warehouse. Have any of you heard the term anchor baby? Right, so I hadn't. And so this actually ties into one of my friends from Haiti who was like, oh yeah, I came here as an anchor baby. I've actually been a citizen my entire life. But so his mother from Haiti had come here when she was pregnant illegally and had him here. And so he's a US citizen by birth. And then she took him back to Haiti for 21 years and was willing to wait that 21 years until he could come here legally as a citizen and claim that right. And then he could sponsor her to come over. So just the level of commitment and long-term planning that people go through to get here. So I don't think this is a derogatory term. You may need to correct me, but that may just be based on the person who talked about it to me first, was pretty casual about it. So anyways, apologies if that is actually something. So anyways, next is the second category of family visas. And so this is the family sponsorship and or preference visas. And so there is a numerical cap for these that's set by Congress. I believe it was set in the Immigration Act of 1990, but it often shifts year to year. There are a couple of these that change. And so this just says that US citizens can sponsor their adult children or their siblings, right? So the categories that weren't listed under immediate family. And then there are some different applications and venues for green card holders to sponsor family members as opposed to if you're a citizen. So this is just highlighting there are different pathways. That's where you get a lot of the different terms and numbers and codes on the visas. So, all right. Any questions? We'll move on to the other types. All right, wonderful. So next we have the work visas. And so this is employee sponsorships or employer sponsorships, sponsoring an employee. So I guess either or. So there's a cap set on this by Congress, so 140,000. And so there's some specific categories that are included. Maybe we'll do one at a time, actually. That's a better idea. Okay. So those who have extraordinary ability, those who have advanced degrees, so perhaps slightly less extraordinary but still really useful, So we have skilled workers. And so typically this is reserved for people with at least a bachelor's degree equivalent, but only about 10,000 of these visa slots are kind of allotted for those coming over without any special skills or degrees. And so that kind of feeds into and ties back to migrant workers and some difficulties they face with paperwork, or not paperwork, but they still may need the work. Yeah, okay. So then there's also special immigrants. There's a category, so religious workers, international organization workers, certain unaccompanied minors. And then we also have allotment for foreign investors. So, all right. Moving on, there's also the diversity lottery. And so currently there's a 50,000 person cap on these visas, but this is a bit more flexible, I believe. And so for an example, we were able to kind of have a special category for Afghani and Iraqi citizens recently who helped the US government in our time there. And then we also have some flexibility in there for human trafficking victims. So, and then otherwise you have to apply for this lottery. And then once your applications are submitted and then subsequently approved, then you're put into the actual drawing. So not every application is qualified, if that makes sense. And so one thing that would disqualify you is if you're from a country that we already have a lot of representation from here in the US. So big ones are, I believe, Mexico and China and India, probably a couple others, or I think a lot of others actually. But and so there's a lottery cap per country of origin as well. So even if you're not from one of those big name countries, there's still only a certain amount of space for you according to this diversity lottery. So, and then just to give you an idea about numbers, fiscal year of 2018, which was the most recent current source I was able to find in the course of my research. So about 14 million applicants, and then if you remember the 50,000 approved. So it's a very small percent of being able to come to the US based on the diversity lottery. So I'm curious then, I'm sure some of you, I know at least one of us from the Friday presentation has a student from the diversity lottery. So, and it's always great. It's, they described it as very happy. The student was talking in class, like, they're just waiting in a refugee camp, and it had been a couple of years, and all of a sudden one day, boom, hey, you're going to the US. And so that's great. And it is a good opportunity, even if the chances are slim. So, and then just some other categories. So, and a lot of these are temporary visas, right? Not permanent residency green cards. So there are specialty occupations like a visiting professor or a researcher. There are temporary workers. So this is where a lot of our migrants are able to get working permits, I believe. So then there's student visas. So a special category for transferred employees, like if your company starts a new American branching, you get to be in charge of that. And then extraordinary athletes, performers, so I believe celebrities sometimes if they have to go film in a different country. Field workers from Mexico and Canada specifically. And that was the end of that. Okay, cool. And then these are the humanitarian visas. So the subcategories in this, sorry, are refugees, asylees, and humanitarian parolees. And so, excuse me, there is a numerical cap set by the sitting resident each year for how many refugees we can or will take in the US. And so this is after an assessment of like the needs overseas and the needs here, or needs across borders, not necessarily overseas specifically. So there's no cap for asylees, no numerical cap. And so the logic there is just that, the asylum process is for situations that are a bit more urgent, a bit more dire, maybe you had to flee a lot quicker. And so it's harder to predict and then, set a cap off that. So, and then the humanitarian parole is kind of like the next most urgent and like very urgent emergencies, I guess, very extenuating circumstances. And I believe this was used in Afghanistan. So getting our people, or the people who helped us the most, the ones in the most urgent danger, kind of out. And so that was kind of the legal tool to do that. So, and then once the people with law backgrounds can correct me. So this, the example is used because the regular channels were backlogged. So I believe this is kind of when COVID was still a thing, and I think that was the big one. Okay, so here's just a graph of numbers showing the amount of refugees versus the amount of asylum persons or approved asylum visas. So as you can see, just a lot more refugees as opposed to asylees. So, all right. So just again to recap, a refugee is a person outside of their country who is essentially fleeing persecution and can't go back. Otherwise, they'll be in very bad circumstances in danger of losing life or limb. So, and or general imprisonment. So, and then our 5 grounds. So, all right, any questions? And then we'll talk about specifically the stages of flight that from a refugee perspective, and maybe we'll take a short break. All right, cool. I'm going to grab a thing of water real quick, which I thought I had right behind me. All right, so thank you for sticking with me. All right, so if any of you have done the attendance sheets for our classes, you'll notice that some of our students have their names just in plain black on the attendance sheet. Some of them have their name, their first name in black, but their last initial in red. Those signify, I believe, refugee students that come to us. The others are typically just immigrant students. So they came here on different visas, essentially. And then a bit about our funding. So we're mainly funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And so the PDE, right? We have PDE students and we have a certain number of dollars, like certain number of dollars per seat, right, in our classes. And then refugees, as part of their kind of terms of resettlement when they come here, a lot of them, and sometimes it's terms of employment as well. They have to prove that they're going to an English class. Usually it's through an employment. That's not true. Okay. For Catholic Charities, we have resettlement and employment ESL students that both of those departments give to us. And then other resettlement agencies give us ESL students as well. So part of their terms of resettlement are going to English classes. And so we get separate dollars from another state department, RSS, so Refugee Social Services, I believe, to fund those seats. And so you'll see a lot more new refugee students coming in through that funding and through those venues. So if anyone's curious what those symbols on your attendance sheets mean. So wonderful. All right. So getting back to it. All right. So we're going to be talking about the stages of flight for refugees and or asylees. So, and this is paraphrased almost directly from some world relief training that's available for free online that I would highly recommend. So typically the first stage is an escalating situation. And what they call this is pre-flight chaos. And so in the home country, conditions begin to deteriorate quickly. or sometimes escalating more slowly. So an example is, economic instability, growing military coup, shifting government, and or just growing corruption in the government, or a natural disaster, right? So in this stage, there's the exposure to violence or likelihood that you will become a victim of that violence escalates. And then based on any of the 5 categories that we had talked about earlier, so violence could be related to, race, ethnicity, nationality, membership in the social group, etc. So, and then even if it's, so the idea there is that there could be a lot of violence in your country of origin, and a lot of people could flee, but if you can't prove that you were maybe a target of that violence, you may not be granted refugee status by the UN. So growing scarcity of resources and needs in general, another marker of pre-flight chaos. So this could be food, water, employment, medical care, access to, so like the systems start to fail, right? You may not be able to access your money in your bank, or so power, internet, etc. So increased fear and anxiety in general, which kind of snowballs into more likelihood for violence and or so I was going to say riots, but that's kind of the same thing, maybe. So often this goes with the economic turmoil and rising rates of unemployment and subsequent crime. So yeah. And then the next stage is leaving. So I actually have a little story for you, and then I think we might have time for a bit of a discussion. So I'll put you back into breakout rooms for this. So my story with this is just when I was a small child, maybe 4 or 5, so teeny bopper, I had this stuffed unicorn, right? Beanie Baby. This isn't the exact model because this was like 20 or so years ago. And he was my favorite. So much so that I don't remember his name right now. But then I also had these sparkly hair ties that I really, really loved. So these were my most treasured possessions, right? And so in school, I think it must have been kindergarten, because we were talking about stop, drop, and roll procedures and what to do if there's a house fire, right? Use the back of your hand to feel if the door is warm or hot. And have a safe meeting spot for your family to kind of rendezvous afterwards, right? That's the part that stuck with me. And I came away really thinking that I'd face a lot more house fires. Thankfully, a blessing, it hasn't been the case. Knock on wood. Anyways, so afterwards, I was very paranoid about house fires, right? And so I just, stayed up thinking, what would happen if I'm not prepared and I lose all of my things? What would I want to keep? And so the answer is my unicorn and my hair ties, right? So my favorite thing. So I put the hair ties on the unicorn and snuck downstairs one night, really sneaky, right? My parents were watching a movie or something, and I opened the front door and I chucked it as far as I could into the yard, because then, it would be safe from the fire. The fire wouldn't reach it. And like, okay, safe. I could sleep soundly. Because our rendezvous point was then at the mailbox. So I was aiming for the mailbox. And then my dad ran over it with the lawnmower, so it didn't actually work. But so that's just a little bit of an illustration. And I'm sure you can draw the parallel, and I don't mean to make light of the situations that our students had come from, but just to kind of get you thinking about, if you had 5 minutes to grab the important things from your house, if you had to flee or go somewhere, if it was a fire, what would you grab? So I'm just going to stick you into your breakout rooms again real quick, maybe for like 2 minutes this time or something kind of short, and just kind of have a conversation about what you think it would be good to grab. So, and reopen all. How do I make it a shorter time? Maybe 3. Okay. And go. And all right. Hi again, guys. Thank you. I'm hoping you had a good discussion. All right, click on another one. All right. Wonderful. Other people should be joining us. Time is up. All right. Very cool. And then at the end, we're actually making pretty good time. We're on track to end before 8. So then I'll stop the recording and we can talk about any actual questions you might have or discussions or examples. So I'll turn off the recording for the debrief. So did I close all rooms? I thought I closed all rooms. There we go. Okay, so again, if you have any burning questions, we can talk about that more freely after the fact. So wonderful. All right. All right, so I hope you guys all had some good discussions and ideas. And as I was telling the first breakout room to be done, one of them only has 2 people. We will have a bit of a debrief at the end. We're on track. We're making pretty good time. So if you have any burning questions, I'll turn off the recording and we can discuss that a bit more freely. So, or not also. So, all right. So, oh wait, let me first scroll back because I don't want it to be spoilers. I had to edit something in my slideshow actually. Share. All right, let's click here. Let's click here. And now let's click here. Should practice for, oh no, now you can see, that's okay. You guys are all smart. I'm sure you came up with very similar or probably better answers. So some of you may have, so this is not counting family members. Maybe some of you said family members. I forgot that that was on there, but here are just some ideas, right? So pets, which may or may not be family members, depending on who you ask. Like example, I would definitely take the cat, but my husband might, have less patience because she is kind of crazy. Then, phones, electronics, chargers, right? Maybe family pictures or albums, important documents, maybe any valuables if you can, right? And so, and this really depends on your circumstances. Maybe you have a lot of time to prepare, maybe send some things ahead to relatives or to a safe place, or maybe you don't, right? So just again, just get those wheels turning. So wonderful. All right, so, well, I don't know what that sound was. Okay, so the next stage in flight is the flight, right? So this is difficult. This is when the decision is made to leave. And I can't imagine it ever really being an easy decision. Like you might know for sure this is what we have to do, but it's never, I can't imagine it being easy, right? So, I mean, I could be wrong. So yeah, people may or may not have time to gather resources, pack up, they may or may not be able to withdraw money from the bank, or even contact relatives in other locations saying, hey, we're going. So oftentimes the flight itself is traumatic, and the likelihood for experiencing trauma along the way just grows the longer you go on. And so we'll talk a bit about trauma in a few moments. So there's a high risk of harm and or death or witnessing death, especially if you're very young or very old. Generally lack of food, clean water, sleep, shelter along the way. So, and again, this is both for any displaced person, really, whether you're internally displaced or otherwise. And then leaving family members behind or losing people along the way is another traumatic event that could happen. And then typically migrants also face increased costs for travel and then increased risk that goes along with that, right? So for so traffickers and or just, yeah, increased costs, increased risk, people who may take advantage of you one way or another. So and then Donna has given us a resource also in the chat if you want to take a moment to look at that. Wonderful. And then also migrants are likely to face hostile populations along the way, whether it be kind of on the trek or in brief places of refuge or even in refugee camps, right? So different countries have different, actually, I think it's on the next slide. So wonderful. All right, so next step is just moving, right? So life in transit. So this is after the decision has been made to flee. And a lot of the dangers and risks in this stage are similar to the initiating the flight. But this stage kind of encompasses the stretch of time between past and future homes. And this can stretch on for years or decades. I believe in the training on Friday, one of the teachers was talking about a student who was in a refugee camp for 25 years, so 2.5 decades, which I believe is longer than average, but maybe not by much. Feel free to chime in.
I think that's typical for people from Bhutan, Nepal. They were the people who came from Bhutan and were put in refugee camps in Nepal. Their average stay there was 20 years.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks, Barb. And it was actually Erica who shared that. So yeah, maybe similar class, same class. Moving on. Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah. And so at this stage, aid does become available. But it may not be reliable, right? It may not be through World Relief. It may not be through the UNHCR. It may just be locals who offer services at increased prices or not, but it may not be as high quality. It may not be, and not saying that every help from a big organization is the highest quality, but they tend to be more reliable, but also more difficult to kind of get approved for. So, yeah, again, many refugees live in camps along the way, sometimes for years. Not every refugee, though, lives in a camp. Many times they just make do with whatever they can, whatever housing they can find in wherever they land or stay to rest. So increased risk of physical violence, there's resource scarcity, and then political and societal hostility that are faced. And then some host countries don't allow refugees to work and some do. So it kind of depends on where you land or where you are headed. So, but usually there's a scarcity of employment opportunities no matter what, and then also lack of education. So like, think of all the children who are born in these camps, and just the interrupted education of anyone who has to flee and they can't continue that. So, and I think we in adult education see a lot of ramifications of that, right? We have a lot of students who can't read in any language. So, and then subsequently then, for lack of opportunity, this stage is often marked by lack of hope and just general boredom, maybe nihilism, right? So, and then I have a story to read to you, actually. This is a story that I think really encapsulates or helps to illustrate a child's point of view, a child in one of these situations. So let's see if I can get my document camera. And then just a bit of a change of pace for us. So, nope, that's not it. So this is called Lubna and Pebble. And so by Wendy Medour, and then illustrated by Daniel Egnues. And I think I just botched that. My Ziki is kind of broken, it doesn't stand up on its own. So I'll see if I can turn the pages all at the same time. All right. So are you able to see this? If you pin to speaker view, that might help. Anyway, so I'll just read this. There we go. 2 hands. All right, so Lubna and Pebble. I'll try my best to show you both illustrations on both pages. So Lubna's best friend was a pebble. It was shiny and smooth and gray. Lubna found it on the beach when they arrived in the night. Then she fell asleep in Daddy's salty arms. When Lubna opened her eyes, it was morning. They had landed in a world of tents. Lubna clutched Daddy's hand and gripped her pebble. Somehow, she knew they'd keep her safe. So, in a big white tent, Lubna found a felt-tipped pen. She drew a happy face on her pebble. "Hello, Pebble," whispered Lubna, and Pebble smiled back. Lubna told Pebble everything about her brothers, about home, about the war. Pebble always listened to her stories. Pebble always smiled when she felt scared. "I love you, Pebble," sighed Lubna. Then the winter arrived. The winds began to blow and the tents began to flap. Daddy said, "Come close, I'll keep you warm." But Lubna was worried. What if Pebble gets a cold? "Well, that must never happen," said Daddy, and he went and found a shoebox and a tea towel. So you can see the box. "Thank you," Lubna grinned. Then she put Pebble to bed and kissed it goodnight. Soon, a little boy arrived. At first, he had no words, just blinks and sneezes and stares. "This is my best friend, Pebble," Lubna said. The little boy coughed and sneezed, then smiled. "Hello, Pebble. My name is Amir." Lubna and Amir became friends. They played hide and seek underneath the stars. But at bedtime, Lubna whispered to Pebble, "You are still my best friend." One day, Daddy was beaming. "We're leaving. We found a new home." Lubna felt happy, then sad. Amir cried. That night, Lubna couldn't sleep. She asked Pebble what to do. Pebble didn't answer. But by the morning, Lubna knew. Lubna gave Amir the shoebox and the pen. What do I do if Pebble misses you? Asked Amir. Draw the smile back on, said Lubna. And what do I do if I miss you? Tell Pebble all about it, Lubna said. Amir nodded and held the shoebox tight. Goodbye, Pebble, Lubna whispered. Hello, Pebble, Amir said. The end. So I thought this was just a really good illustration of the kind of cyclical nature, the coming and going that maybe a child would never really get used to, but nonetheless has to deal with. So just a bit of an illustration for this stage of flight. So, all right. So moving on then to the last phase. So the adjustment to the host culture, excuse me, according to World Relief. So this is essentially the U-shaped adjustment phase model. And so, so just because someone has adjusted well and maybe even fits into that mastery phase, that doesn't mean that they have completely gotten over their struggles. You know, they may only now have the language to start to talk about it, whether it be in their first language or in English. And so we're going to talk a little bit about trauma and resilience. And so, and resources that are available both for us and our students. And so it's important to talk about resilience when we talk about trauma. We don't want to get stuck in that deficit-based mindset, right? Of, oh, you've been through so much, I can't imagine, right? And it's important to acknowledge it, but we don't necessarily want to stay there and or only see the negatives that people have been through. So, hope that just all played automatically. So this is all from, well, I guess I'm sharing my screen so you can't see it, but there is a really great seminar available actually in person in Akron, PA, that Charity, if you know Charity, she worked with Mennonite Central Committee. And so I was able to attend a trauma and resilience seminar. So it's specifically called Addressing the Impact of Trauma in Migration. So I'd highly recommend this if you can attend. There are a lot of actually lawyers there from Texas who work on the border, specifically with unaccompanied minors, since unaccompanied minors don't have any right to representation in immigration hearings and stuff. So they are able to work with both the foster system and the immigration legal system to kind of help service those children. So we had a lot of really good conversations and very difficult conversations. So anyway, so that's where I'm pulling this information from. And then along the bottom, again, I have other links that are available to you if you navigate to this on the PowerPoint that is shared. So this PowerPoint. So anyways, resilience is a term used in physics, which means the ability to bend and not break. So when applied to individuals and actually communities as well, the ability to adapt and bounce back in the midst of or after hardship and adversity. So, and then to define trauma, then an individual's groups or groups reaction and the responses to terrible events. So this is just a collection of different definitions that they offered us. And so this first definition is important because it talks about how the effects of trauma are not just physical, but they're also emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and relational. So impacting a person holistically and negatively. So Next is traumatic stress. And so this occurs when our body's ability to respond to threat is overwhelmed, right? So that fight, flight, or freeze response it just gets all out of whack, messed up. Either it is always on, or it's never, or it's like never on, right? So sometimes you see inability to respond to threat as well. And I believe that's actually the next slide. And then a bit of a simpler definition. So trauma is something that when something happens to the body that's too much, too fast, or too soon. So just keeping these in mind as we go through kind of the patterns and or cycles people can fall into. So, and then another term, just a traumagenic event or a critical event, right? So as it's sometimes called. And I believe this slide is just talking about different types of traumagenic events that are common and or more likely to happen in a migration journey. So especially for a refugee or asylee. So it could be a single event, such as, and I thought I had examples. So single event, so assault of any kind, or a natural disaster, right? Witnessing a death of a loved one could be a single event, or it could be ongoing or cumulative traumagenic events such as bullying, neglect, or abuse, detention or incarceration, deportation, ongoing discrimination, and then also torture. So, and so secondary trauma is a thing. This is also so vicarious. So this is when someone has trauma reactions, right? From resulting from witnessing or listening to another person's trauma experience. This can lead to compassion fatigue. And so I know this is something that a lot of resettlement workers and people kind of like us, for lack of better. Okay, backing up. I know I tend to think, oh, why am I so affected by all these heavy topics, these sad stories that my students are telling me or hinting at, right? I didn't go through anything remotely like that, thankfully, but so I feel really, silly or weak to be bummed out by it. But secondary trauma is actually a thing. And so when you're exposed to too much of that, and you don't necessarily, burnout, compassion fatigue is a thing that can happen. So don't discount that. And so another point is that a lot of times a big part of what makes a traumagenic event so overwhelming is the lack of control. You couldn't have done anything differently or to help, or you couldn't have prevented it. And so as a listener, right, for these horrible events, there's, nothing we can do as a listener, right? And so just to, again, reiterate the legitimacy of this burnout. So, and again, there's actually some great support out there for specifically for volunteers in resettlement, which is also us, we're like ESL resettlement, who are experiencing burnout. One of our volunteers who works at Penn State Harrisburg, she has been working with another professor of psychology for workshops specifically for burnt out refugee resettlement volunteers, and just kind of getting together and talking about your experiences and kind of taking steps to heal together and grow in resilience. So if you're interested in that, let me know. So there's another kind of trauma called participatory trauma. And so this is active participation in causing harm to others, whether it be willingly or under duress or by design of the circumstance kind of necessitates it. So example, taking part in torture, abuse, or terrorism, but also members of law enforcement or military. So, and then another category listed is dignity violations. And so this can look like ongoing microaggressions, living under occupation, and then also neglect and abuse. And this was specifically talked about in a domestic sense. So And then also listed are historical, cultural, and structural traumas. And so these three are listed, or these three are closely related and often are kind of interwoven root causes for migration and or kind of mass migration events in a region or community. So. Right. And then also just to keep in mind that events listed and or that you can come up with in these categories often fall into more than one of the categories. So, right, so historical is so cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma. So examples listed are enslavement, colonialism, persecution, or genocide. And then under cultural, we have when attempts are made to destroy all or part of the culture of a people. And so examples are many indigenous peoples throughout many different countries' histories. And then structural, the social structures, policies, institutions, etc., systematically depriving people of land or rights or the ability to meet their basic needs. And so oftentimes there's a lot of intent in intricate interplay between these and the other listed types of traumagenic events that are common. So, yeah, and again, just the hope in that is that there are a lot of really good mental health resources out there for refugees and for people in general. And so that's something, there's a lot of our students and a lot of refugees come from countries where mental health is still very stigmatized and not something they even necessarily have language to talk about. And so, yeah, I like to think that's a good touch point for us, especially upcoming in our health unit, that we are able to kind of help give them language to start talking about again. And again, there are different ways to think about, you know, is someone ready to talk about it or not, and different steps to think through. And so there are some resources that are available for free to help us kind of think through these questions. So, and then these next few slides are some infographics about trauma and stress and the effects on the body. So this gingerbread person kind of illustrates there are a lot of very real and debilitating physiological effects when stress, specifically traumatic stress, compounds in the body. And then this is more of the psychological impacts. And so what I wanted to highlight on this slide is it kind of gets into what a cycle of negativity and what being stuck in the traumatic event or events, some of the symptoms of that and what some of our students may be experiencing or have overcome. And so if it's too small, I can read it to some of you. So just a sense of a loss of safety, a loss of danger cues, a loss of trust, and then loss of ability to be intimate or form new relationships, then shame or dissociation from self, either mentally, physically, or otherwise, loss of the sense of self-worth, right? So feeling very powerless, and then also just getting stuck in reenactments, right? So that's where we have those, triggers. And so overusing, it's a bit more difficult to talk about and or, but back when I worked housekeeping, I worked with a international student who was here and wasn't able to be in a room with a vacuum cleaner because it just sounded like, when her town was being taken over and occupied with all the loud noises. So, yeah, so just know that these are things that happen out there. So anyways, something then again to talk about is, so hurt people, right? And so the importance of being able to process and trying to break out of this negativity spiral. And each person's journey is different, and it may not be like, a one-time boom, you're better, right? Once you are able to overcome some of these things, right? It's a long journey, and there are ups and downs to it. So what this specifically is illustrating, there can be kind of two negative spirals after a traumagenic event that are keeping a person weighed down, right? There's an acting in cycle, right? So the feelings of unhealthy coping mechanisms, and kind of blaming yourself, or manifesting in depression or self-harm, right? And then there's also, this can kind of sync up with or be in tandem with cycles of acting out, right? So an aggressor cycle. And so that's where you get, like the hurting people aspect. And so the solution, not the solution, but like there is hope, and you're not always stuck in that forever, but being able to find safety, support, breaking free, knowing, kind of stabilizing a bit, you're then able to kind of start, I guess, spiraling out of that death spiral, right? And so the idea is you're able to reconnect and intentionally build relationships, and rebuild your relationship with yourself as well. And then, yes, and so this is something that a lot of students and their children probably have faced and or gone through. And so these are some sites and resources that offer a lot of really good thoughts, tips, systems, and specifically workshops and webinars that, if you're interested in hearing more expertise on these topics. So again, this is all hyperlinked for you. So yeah, so I think any questions then, we're going to just summarize resettlement real quickly after this. So, and again, you can just save it for the last.
So you're Amy, this is Donna. You're going to have this PowerPoint available that we can get those links, etc.
Yeah, for sure. It's on the
Okay.
Google Drive, and I can also probably just send it after I'm done presenting as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So, peeking through resettlement then. So, and some of you may know this. I didn't realize this was so long. So, according to the UNHCR, resettlement is the selection and transfer of refugees from a country in which they have sought protection to a third country, which has granted them permission to stay on the basis of long-term or permanent status. And so it's a solution that ensures refugees are protected from refoulement, so like forced return to a dangerous situation, and provides them access to rights similar to those enjoyed by citizens, and then ideally giving them opportunities to eventually become citizens in that country of resettlement, although not always. So that's a bit wordy, but essentially what we want to talk about in this section is that the UNHCR and other actors in this arena have 3 durable solutions for migration in the world today. So first is voluntary repatriation, so helping people to get back to their home country when things are safe. And so I think some of us have had students who have actually already returned to the Ukraine. And I'm not sure the details of these returns or the specific reasons, but that's an example of what that is. So third country resettlement, which is a lot of what, so if you stay at a refugee camp and then come to the US, that's what third country resettlement is, usually. So just I should stick to the quote. So we provide cultural orientation, language, and vocational training. So this is the UNHCR providing all of these services while before the refugees arrive to the US. And then, so of the 20 million refugees that the UNHCR deals with, less than 1% is actually approved for third country resettlement. So if you think of all the students that we deal with, all the waiting lists, all of our community partners and their student populations, that's, a small percent of less than the 1%, which kind of highlights just the need. So, and the importance of the work that we all do And so third is the integration into the host community. So this is refugees who are able to then integrate into the country where their place of landing is, right? So a lot of times, actually, I shouldn't say in the Mediterranean, right? We had this originally in some of those Mediterranean countries, and they got, I think, too much of an influx. I shouldn't speak on that. I didn't actually research that. So yeah, over the past decade, over 1 million refugees around the world have become citizens in their country of first asylum. So, and then again, that's not always feasible based on that particular country of asylum's situation needs. It could change from year to year. So. All right, so here's a cool fact sheet that's available for download or part of it. And this is just specifically refugees to the US in the fiscal year 2021. And you can see their region of origin and then top states for resettlement. And there we are, number 10, go us. Yeah, so this is a nice PDF. I always enjoy a good infographic. So. And so just as a bit of a summary, here's another cool infographic. So the journey starts with fleeing the country of origin, so as a refugee, and then applying one way or another for refuge or asylum and being approved based on the international definition for refugee. And then there's a lot of wait time, interviews, application processes, health screenings that families usually have to go through, families or individuals have to go through. So right, that very thorough vetting process. And then once approved, the refugees go through their, I think it's comprehensive, cultural orientation about their country of origin, or country of resettlement once that's determined, and then that's all before arrival. And then upon arrival, there's more processing, more cultural orientation than the actual nitty-gritty of resettlement. And we also have resettlement volunteers that work with us. And I believe some of the stipulations are someone has to meet the family at the airport and provide first hot meal in their new home that's pre-furnished with, according to dietary restrictions of culture or otherwise. So there's just a lot of other ways to get involved on the resettlement side of things. So, and then, yeah, so lots of options. Okay, anyways, I'm going to stop recording as we move into our debrief. So this is just called the Rosebud Thorn, and there we go. So I just want you to be thinking one of these points. So a thorn would be something that's challenging that you learned or were prompted to think about. Bud is something, so right, a bud is something that will bloom tomorrow. Something new that you want to learn more about or maybe use in the future. And then the rose is just a highlight or something that really grabbed you, or a connection that you made that you wanted to kind of parse out a bit. And yeah, that's it. And then I'll share some more resources. So stop share and